In October 1962, a Ford dealership in Bowling Green, Kentucky, sold a used 1953 Ford F100 half-ton pickup to a tobacco farmer for $385 cash on the barrelhead. That same truck, restored but not concours, just running and honest, sold at a Mecum auction last spring for $34,000, and a brand new F-150 Platinum off the lot in that same Bowling Green now stickers north of $78,000 before the dealer adds his paint protection package and his nitrogen-filled tires. Today, I'm going to tell you about 3 pickups that working mechanics across this country are quietly buying for themselves, hiding in their back lots, and rebuilding on weekends while they sell you a new truck that won't see 150,000 miles without a transmission rebuild. One of them was rated by Popular Mechanics in 1968 as having the most over-engineered frame ever bolted together in Detroit. Another one outlasted the company that built it, and the third, the one at number 1, is the truck your grandfather parked behind the barn and your father swore he'd restore someday. Detroit doesn't want you looking backward. The dealer networks, the lobbyists at the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, the marketing men who replaced engineers in the boardrooms back in the late 70s, they've spent 50 years convincing American men that old is bad and new is progress. Subscribe right now if you're tired of being sold a payment book instead of a truck. Number 3. The 1967 to 1972 Chevrolet C10. The C10 belonged to a specific kind of American man. He worked at the Caterpillar plant in Peoria, or he ran a small cattle operation outside Amarillo, or he poured concrete in the suburbs of Atlanta during the building boom that followed the Civil Rights Act. He was the kind of man who didn't trust banks, kept cash in a coffee can, and bought his trucks 2 years used because he understood depreciation before anyone taught it in a business school. The C10 was his rolling office, his hauler, his Sunday church ride when the Buick wouldn't start. In 1969, a clean C10 long bed with the 250 inline 6 sold used in Springfield, Missouri for around $1,450. The Bureau of Labor Statistics put the average manufacturing wage that year at $3.19 an hour, which meant a working man could buy that truck with about 11 weeks of gross pay. Try that math on a new Silverado today and you'll laugh until your chest hurts. The morning starts cold. He turns the key, the 250 inline 6 chugs twice, catches on the third compression stroke, and that long, lazy idle settles in like a heartbeat. The smell of unburnt gasoline drifts through the vent window. His left hand finds the column shifter without looking. The bench seat is cracked vinyl, sun-faded to the color of wheat, and the steering wheel is the diameter of a dinner plate. Popular Mechanics tested the C10 frame in 1968 and reported it could carry 40% over its rated payload without permanent deformation. The straight 6, properly maintained, would run 300,000 miles before it needed anything more than a valve adjustment and a timing chain. Mechanics know this. The villain here is the modern crew cab half-ton with its 10-speed automatic, its turbocharged aluminum block, its 47 control modules, and its repair bills that look like mortgage payments. Chevrolet replaced honesty with horsepower numbers. They replaced a truck a man could fix with a wrench for a truck a dealer has to plug into a laptop. What we lost was the idea that a working man could own his tools, including the one parked in his driveway. Number 2, the 1961 to 1971 Dodge D100 Sweptline. The Sweptline Dodge was the truck of men nobody put in commercials. It was driven by independent plumbers in Cleveland, by Korean War veterans running small engine repair shops in rural Pennsylvania, by Mexican-American ranch hands in the Rio Grande Valley who needed something tough and didn't care that Ford and Chevy outsold Dodge 4-1. Dodge was the underdog brand for the underdog man. The Slant Six engine, canted 30 degrees to the passenger side, was the most reliable American engine of its decade, and the men who bought these trucks knew it even if the magazines didn't write about it. In 1965, a new D100 with the 225 Slant Six and a 3-on-the-tree manual stickered for $2,106 at a Dodge dealership in Lubbock, Texas. The average weekly wage that year, according to the BLS, was $107.53. That truck cost about 20 weeks of work for a man making the median. A 2-year-old example in 1967 could be had for $950 cash. Pre-dawn, somewhere outside Wichita Falls, the driver pulls the choke, taps the gas pedal once, and the Slant Six fires before he's done turning the key. There's a rattle from the lifters that will quiet in 30 seconds once oil pressure climbs. The cab smells like cigarette ash and saddle leather and the faint sourness of an old thermos. He grinds first, lets out the clutch, and the truck moves forward with that distinct Mopar shudder. The United States Army tested the Slant Six in fleet duty during the mid-60s and recorded engines passing 250,000 miles without a rebuild on regular maintenance alone. The block was so overbuilt that racers in the 70s were turning them to 7,000 revolutions per minute and not breaking cranks. The villain is Chrysler itself, which by 1980 had abandoned the Slant Six for cost-cutting 4 cylinders and badge-engineered Mitsubishi platforms, and which spent the next 40 years forgetting what it once knew how to build. What we lost was a truck made by men who believed the engine should outlive the owner. Before I get to number 1, you need to understand something about how this happened, because it didn't happen by accident. In 1977, an internal memo circulated at one of the big 3 in Detroit. The memo, parts of which surfaced years later in industry trade press, laid out a strategy that marketing executives called managed replacement. The idea was simple and cold. Trucks built in the 50s and 60s were lasting too long. Farmers were keeping them 20, 25, 30 years. Mechanics were rebuilding the engines for a couple $100s and getting another decade out of them. That was a problem because every truck still running was a truck not being sold. The solution was to redesign the modern pickup around what one executive reportedly called perceived obsolescence. Add electronics, add comfort features that fail, add emissions equipment that requires dealer service. Move from bolt-on body panels to glued and welded unibody-style construction that can't be easily repaired after a fender bender. Move the truck up market, away from the working man, toward the suburban buyer who would trade every 4 years on a lease. By 1995, the average new pickup price had tripled in real dollars from 1965. By 2015, it had quintupled. The dealer service department, not the showroom, became the profit center. The men who designed the 1965 Dodge Slant Six would not recognize what their industry has become. The mechanics who fix these new trucks for a living, the ones who see what's inside the dashboards and behind the firewalls, those are the men who go home and buy a 1968 Ford on Craigslist for $2,000 cash. They know. Number 1, the 1948 to 1979 Ford F-Series with special weight to the 1965 to 1972 F100. This is the truck. If you grew up in this country between 1955 and 1985, you saw one of these parked at your grandfather's house. You saw it in the gravel driveway with a tarp over the bed. You saw it at the feed store in Tulsa, at the lumber yard in Roanoke, at the boat ramp on Lake of the Ozarks. You saw it carrying hay, hauling firewood, pulling a small camper to a fishing spot in northern Minnesota. The F100 was the truck of the American working century. A coal miner in West Virginia drove one. A wheat farmer in Kansas drove one. A shrimp boat captain in Biloxi drove one. A Korean War veteran who came home to Flint and worked 35 years on the Buick line drove one. and when he retired in 1986, he kept driving it until the day he died. In 1968, a new F100 with the 240, inline 6, and a 3-speed manual stickered for $2,366. The BLS reported the average weekly manufacturing wage that year at $122.51. Roughly 19 weeks of gross pay for a brand new truck that in many cases is still running today. A used 3-year-old example in 1971 could be bought for under $1,200, and many were. 6 in the morning on a frost-hard November field outside Lincoln, Nebraska. The old man, 81 years old, his hands the color of saddle soap and the texture of bark, pulls the door handle and it opens with that familiar metallic groan. He slides onto the bench. The vinyl is cold. He pumps the gas twice, turns the key, and the 246 lights immediately, because it always lights. The exhaust note is low and even. The cab smells like motor oil, hay dust, and the cherry pipe tobacco he smoked from 1962 until his wife made him quit in 1994. He puts it in gear, the truck moves. Motor Trend tested the F100 in 1970 and reported the chassis durability exceeded any half-ton on the American market. Independent fleet records from rural electric cooperatives in the Midwest documented F100s reaching 400,000 miles in service with nothing more than 2 clutch jobs and a single head gasket. There are documented examples in Nebraska, in Montana, in eastern Oregon of F100s from the late 60s still in daily farm service in 2024, 56 years after they rolled off the Dearborn line. Modern people cannot understand this. They cannot understand a machine designed to be repaired instead of replaced. They cannot understand a truck whose owner's manual included instructions for adjusting the valves and setting the points. They cannot understand a vehicle that became, over decades, a member of the family. The villain is every marketing campaign Ford has run since 1995. Every Super Duty King Ranch commercial with a man in a clean Stetson, every $90,000 Raptor sold to a suburban buyer who will never put a bag of mulch in the bed. Ford still makes a truck called the F-150. It is not the same truck. It does not share the same soul. What we lost when the F-100 ended was the idea that a working American could buy a tool, use it for 40 years, pass it to his son, and trust it the entire time. That idea is gone from the showroom floor. It exists now only in the backlots of small-town mechanics and in the memories of men who are starting to leave us. I tried to buy one of these last fall, a 1969 F100 long bed, original 246, 3 on the tree in a barn outside Sedalia, Missouri. The owner's son was selling it after his father passed. I drove 4 hours, looked the truck over, listened to the engine catch on the second crank, and offered him $4,200 cash. He took $4,500 from a man who showed up an hour later, a mechanic from Kansas City who had driven 5 hours and brought a trailer. That mechanic knew exactly what he was buying. So here's the challenge. This weekend, drive past the small independent garages in your town, look behind the building, look at what the owner drives home in. It won't be a new truck. Then call your father or your uncle or the oldest man you know and ask him what he drove when he was 30 years old. Ask him what it cost. Ask him what it sounded like at 5 in the morning. Tell me in the comments which truck your family drove and which state you're riding from. I want to know which parts of this country still remember. Because these trucks were never just trucks. They were proof that an American man with a wrench and a weekend and a little bit of cash could keep his own life running. That is what we are losing. That is what they are selling away from us. And that is why the mechanics are buying them back one at a time in secret while there are still a few left.